Good evening and welcome. Tonight we'll be going over the history and geography of Iraq. Let me grab my pencil real quick so I can show you geography. Then I'll go over its history and then we'll flip through this book and I'll show you lots of really interesting pictures. So Iraq is located in the Middle East. It has quite a few boundaries. It has this boundary with Syria, this boundary with Turkey, this long boundary with Iran. It's got this border with Kuwait, this border with Saudi Arabia, and this border with Jordan. And it looks landlocked, but it's not. It actually has right here between Iran and Kuwait, a very tiny little coastline right there in the Persian Gulf right here. So not 100% landlocked, just like 99% landlocked. The most important geographic feature of Iraq would be its two rivers. The longest river in Iraq is the Euphrates, which flows down through here. And there's also the Tigris River that starts up here and flows down. And obviously that's going to have an important part in our history. They combine right about here to make up this border here with Iraq and Iran. Pretty important in its history. Flows out here. So in between these two rivers here is an area that we're going to talk about in its history. It's referred to as Mesopotamia. And it is incredibly fertile, considering it's got two sources for irrigation, lots of fertile land in between there. So the majority of the population lives pretty much on this side of the Euphrates in Iraq. And you can see on this map that there's some green down here where the rivers meet. This area is known as the Mesopotamian Marshes or the Iraqi Marshes. We're going to talk about those in the history a little bit, and there's pictures in here of the marshes that I can show you. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's really interesting. There's been a culture that's lived on the marshes, like physically on the marshes in little reed huts floating around for quite a long time. And again, we'll talk about them a bit in the history. Speaking of other ethnic groups, we're going to head north up here to this region. This is the more mountainy region of Iraq. It's pretty flat for the most part. Up here we have mountains to the point where they get snow in the winter and it melts down into the rivers. These are the Zagros Mountains, which are mostly dominant down in Iran here, but they do bleed over to this section. So this area up here is known as Kurdistan or Iraqi Kurdistan. And that is where the ethnic Kurd people live. They are the world's largest ethnic group without their own, actual country. And we'll talk about them in history as well. There's lots of different ethnic groups living in Iraq, and there'll be pictures in here of the most known ones, I suppose. So like I said, the snow melts, floods the rivers down here. So there's quite a few dams you can see on this map here. There's actually a lot in this region here. You can only really see a couple. This is the biggest one. It is Lake Tartar. And not much else to say other than it's a typical little dammed reservoir area. Lots of plant life and stuff being in this area. So what's over here on this side of Iraq? Pretty much nothing. It's pretty much just dry, sandy desert. And, I always say you can tell when you see straight lines like this. Mother Nature doesn't make straight lines. Those are man-made. And usually, almost always, when you have a straight line, that means there's nothing there. It's just an imaginary line for the most part. There's nothing that distinguishes this border here with Jordan. There's nothing there. This border here with Saudi Arabia. Well, you can see roads and things, but for the most part, pretty much nothing. The capital city is right here. It is Baghdad. It is I believe, the largest city in the Middle East and the second largest city in the Arab world after Cairo. Iraq has lots of major cities going north to south. There's Mosul up here, and Kirkuk. Erbil is another one with lots of different ethnic minority groups living there and having their own neighborhoods and things like that. Of course, there's Baghdad and Al-Hila, and Basra is the main kind of seaport area, even though it's not too close to the coast, but it's where all the shipping stuff is processed and sent out. What is Iraq shipping out? It is oil. Oil makes up pretty much all of their exports and how the country gets most of its money. It's a very oil-heavy country, which is very important for its history. So let's get into it. And a note before I start history is that Iraq has a very long, very complicated history. It's where history begins. This is where written history started. So I am not going to go over every single detail. This is not going to be an intricately detailed history of Iraq. That would take way too long, especially in its ancient history. So I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version, the quick, to the point, succinct version, with a couple notes here and there I'll show you, but I'm going to be skipping over a couple of parts of its history. I'm not going to go over every single kingdom that's existed here. That would, oh my gosh, like so many. I'm not going to go over every dynasty in total detail or anything, so there will be chunks missing out of its history. So if you want to write down about them, the comments, I'm not going to talk about Nineveh or a couple other ancient cities. I'm not going to really talk about Ur and Uruk, but if you want to talk about them, just go ahead and leave a comment. Make it interesting. It'll be included as part of the video so people can learn more about Iraq after they wake up, I suppose. So let's begin. So I usually start off with people have been living here since blah blah blah, but like I said, written history began in Mesopotamia. So people have been living here since the dawn of history. So around 10,000 BCE is when we kind of have the first evidence of humans living here, but the first real civilization was founded down in the southern part here between the Tigris and Euphrates, and the civilization was known as Sumer, or Sumer, I think. They're Sumerians, I should say. So they started farming, right? These rivers flooded, kind of like the Nile over in Egypt, except the rivers didn't flood at the right time for harvesting. It was flooding their crops. So they invented irrigation to kind of divert the water, save it for when they needed it, and farming exploded in the area. By about the 6th millennium BCE is when the Sumerian civilization started to really pick up. By the 4th millennium BCE, they had the first writing called cuneiform. They had the wheel, they invented the wheel, they invented religion as we know it today, basically. I mean, there's signs around the world of religious activity before them, but this is the first time that it was like organized religion, I should say, began here. And the first city-states sprung up down here. Uruk is what believed to be the root name for Iraq. It sounds pretty similar. Uruk was famous for for a lot of things, but in particular the Epic of Gilgamesh was the first epic poem ever written, and the first story ever written down, and it was about a king named Gilgamesh and all of his adventures in Uruk. So up north in this part of the valley, over time, a lot of time, this is about the 24th century BCE now, is the Acadian Empire. And they start rising up, and led by King Sargon, he comes down and conquers Sumer, and thus creates kind of like the first real like empire. The first time Iraq was invaded, and there's gonna be many other invasions, but the first invasion happened here. And the Acadian Empire kind of rose to prominence and then sank back down. In between its rise and fall, other cultures came in, a lot of them, and then those cultures would reach prominence, and then the Acadians would overshadow them, and then they would wax and wane, sort of. In the 20th century, the Amorite people came, and they didn't establish the city of Babylon, but they built it up and made it into a grand city. And the most famous king during that time was Hammurabi, who came to power in 1792 BCE. And I mentioned him because I have a personal connection with Hammurabi. So this is going to be a little side story. In 6th grade, I was 12 years old, and we started learning ancient civilization, starting with Mesopotamia. And everyone in class was given a topic to research and give like a little 2-3 minute presentation to the class, and I got Hammurabi's code. So King Hammurabi pretty much invented the first written laws. There were laws before them, but this is the first time they were really written down on a stele or a stone and put up in the city so that everyone could read them. And they were pretty harsh. I mean, pretty much all the laws were punishable by death, like if you broke pretty much any law. It's also where the term eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth came from. So, me at 12 years old is trying to research Hammurabi's code, and that's pretty much all I could get. Like, that was it. And I stressed out so bad trying to figure out how I was going to talk about this thing for like 2 minutes in front of the class. And I got really mad and really frustrated. I eventually wound up like describing like how they chiseled the words on and the picture on the top, and just really tried to just like stretch it out as much as I could because I didn't have anything else to say. And I carried that grudge against Hammurabi for a long time. And then flash forward to I just graduated from high school. I went to Europe as like a present, a graduation present, and I go to the Louvre and I look down the hall and I said, "You, I know you." So that's me at 18. I spotted this and went, "You." I ran over and I was like, there it is. There's Hammurabi's code. Like, there's King Hammurabi and all the words down there. And I was so excited. I was mad at first, but then I was like, whoa, that's really it. And I wigged out, and it was really cool. I love this picture. You can't really tell how excited I am. I was very tired. But there it is. You know, I got to be face to face with good old King Hammurabi, who made that like 2 days in my life as a preteen very stressful. So anyway, Hammurabi is the king during that time. So like I said, pretty much the Assyrians would rise to power, and after a couple of, millennia, they would sink back down, and then other city-states in the south would rise up. There were Aramaeans, the Chaldeans came in, the Kassites were more north, but the Medes, eventually the Persians and Parthians. I'm getting kind of ahead of myself. The Chaldeans brought over when they were in charge of Babylon. Their most famous king was King Nebuchadnezzar II, and he built the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, which we don't really have too much knowledge of, other than it was like a huge, like a skyscraper garden, which is really neat, but we don't really have a lot of concrete evidence about what it really looked like, because it was all plants, so it doesn't really preserve. So that pattern of like Assyrian power and then Babylonian power going back and forth was shattered completely in the 6th century BCE when Cyrus the Great from the Persian Achaemenid Empire over here stormed in and took over. And Cyrus the Great, I mean, he was the first leader to be called the Great. He really believed in whatever your religion is, that's your religion. Whatever your way of life is, that's your way of life. He thought the Babylonian lifestyle was pretty neat. He made that the formal capital of his empire, and pretty much told people to just be hunky-dory. His ancestors weren't as chill and relaxed, but Cyrus the Great was a pretty neat guy in terms of he was the first one to practice religious tolerance and religious freedom. It was so long ago. So that empire was wiped off the map in the 4th century BCE when Alexander the Great swept in and took over, made Babylon the capital of this part of his empire until he died a few years later. And his huge empire that spanned from Greece to India and Egypt shattered into pieces. So this piece over here became part of the Parthian Empire. The Parthians were pretty much the power that took over in the vacuum of Alexander wiping out the Persian Empire. So they came into power over here, and over time the Romans started encroaching in and started taking over kind of more of this area. They didn't control all of what is today Iraq, but they got a pretty good chunk of it. They also brought Christianity with them at this time as well. And the Assyrian people that still live in the northern parts of Iraq, most of them are still Christian to this day. From what I've read in my research. I could be wrong, but that's what my research says, and that's what this book says, so I'm going with it. In 224 CE, the Sassanids came into power over here. Another Iranian descended empire, and they really clashed with the Romans, who at this time were the Byzantine Empire for control, making sure that the Byzantine Romans don't push into their territory, even though they really wanted to. And it was during that conflict in the 7th century when the Muslim conquest occurred. Since that started just down there in Mecca and Medina, not very far away. It was pretty much one of the first stops in the Muslim conquest of this corner of the globe. And they, of course, brought Islam with them, which is still the dominant religion today. And they established the city of Baghdad in the 8th century by the Abbasid Caliphate. And Baghdad became a magnificent city. It was a big learning city. It was a city of learning, I should say, I suppose. The great library was there with so many different works of knowledge from that time, and all of the great minds lived in this area, studying mathematics and astronomy and algebra, just all of the highlights of an enlightened era. This time was known as the Islamic Golden Age, and this is the one time in history where Baghdad really truly thrived. It never reached that point ever again in its history. So what happened? Well, in the year 1257, the Mongols invaded, and they ransacked Baghdad. They destroyed everything. They burned down the library, they slaughtered people, they completely wiped out the city and ruined it. And as it was slowly starting to get back on its feet, in 1401, Tamerlane came in, the descendant of Genghis Khan and the Mongols, and he destroyed it even more. He really made it a point to slaughter as many people as he could. It was really horrific, and this area, Baghdad in particular, but the whole area really came into a decline, as to be expected, I suppose. Eventually, the Safavids would have started to control this area, which is another Iranian-based empire, but just up here was the Ottoman Empire, and, they were expanding. So they clashed. The Ottoman Persian War occurred fighting over territory. In 1639, pretty much all of what is today Iraq came under Ottoman control and stayed that way all the way through World War One. So the Ottomans sided with the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians, so the British invaded. And in 1917, they took Baghdad. It was quite a long struggle, but they did it. They took over the area. And once the war was over, Britain and France really divided up a lot of this chunk over here, like Syria and what have you. And Britain got control of Iraq. Well, this is when it's starting to be called Iraq, because they decided to establish a kingdom, basically. So they appointed a Hashemite king named Faisal I, and the Kingdom of Iraq was born in the very early 1920s. He really worked to convince the British to give the country independence, which it did get on October 3rd, 1932. But those times didn't last very long. It didn't remain a kingdom for very long. In 1941, there was a coup. The king at this time, Faisal II, was a child. So his regent was named Abd al-Ilal. And he was a pretty prominent figure. Obviously, he was running the country. He's like the regent, right? Britain invaded. Britain still had military bases in Iraq, so they had their own interests to look out for. Not to mention oil had been discovered, and they wanted to secure that profit, and they also did not want, it's 1941, right? They did not want like the Nazis or something to grab the oil here. So that was their excuses for invading. They stopped the coup, put al-Ilal back into power, but in 1958 there was a revolution in which al-Ilal was killed along with the king. There was quite a frantic transitional period where the government was trying to figure itself out. There was another coup, and then in 1968 there was another coup led by the Ba'ath Party, and they established control, and they set up a president with a vice president named Saddam Hussein, that guy. And Iraq really started to pick itself back up for the first time in a long time. It became very modernized. The standard of living, quality of living just, reached all kinds of heights. It was like a vacation destination, and kind of like the UAE, like Dubai is now. It was kind of like that back in the day, but Saddam Hussein eventually gained control of the government and the Ba'ath Party and became president in 1979. Also in 1979 was the Iranian Revolution. And by the next year, these two countries were at war. There are a lot of reasons for the Iraq-Iran war. It pretty much boils down to Saddam Hussein and the Ayatollah just not liking each other. That's pretty much what it comes down to. They both could not agree to disagree or agree to anything. So Iraq invaded. They took quite a bit of land, and then Iran took it all back. In 1988, it ended in a stalemate. They just kind of called it quits. Both sides declared victory, but it was a stalemate. Nothing changed. What did change was, of course, the many, many people that lost their lives, including civilians on both sides. And there were accusations, which were pretty much true. That Saddam used chemical weapons against the Iranians, which is a war crime. You're not supposed to do that in a war. Also, the Kurds in the north here sided with the Iranians, so Saddam Hussein was like, oh, a genocide. Just wipe them out. Which was another war crime, obviously. And the Kurds obviously fought back, which they're wont to do. And this war left Iraq pretty devastated financially. They had borrowed a lot of money from Kuwait, which was also very, very wealthy due to oil. And Iraq said, hey, Kuwait, is there any way that you can just, forgive our debt? because we can't pay it back. And Kuwait said no. Also, are you stealing our oil? Iraq said probably. And Kuwait said you can't do that. And Saddam Hussein said, so I'm just going to absorb you and make you part of Iraq. And he invaded Kuwait. And this was in 1990. It was a huge outrage around the world. And a lot of forces came in, mainly a U.S. coalition came in to defend Kuwait. And they invaded and got the Iraqis out. The Iraq army burned a lot of oil fields in Kuwait, which are still damaged to this day. And yeah, it was quite a big mess. It's actually another personal story. My earliest political memory is the Gulf War, as it was known, or Desert Storm was the actual invasion. I was 5 years old, and I liked watching the news because it's me, and they would talk about the Gulf War, and I thought they were saying golf, like G-O-L-F, and they would show the war news right before or after the sports. I don't remember. So I thought it was all over golf. I thought they were playing golf, and it reached a point where they were fighting with guns and bombs, and I was really confused. But I do remember watching that and not understanding what the heck was going on and how that all had to do with golf. But anyway, the United Nations and many other countries around the world put sanctions on Iraq because of their bad behavior, which just made Iraq extremely poor, and people began to suffer under that. And a very odd chapter in history, right? So during the Gulf War, George Bush was president of the United States. In 2003, his son, George W. Bush, is president of the United States, and he decides to fight Saddam Hussein. He decides to say, Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. He's plotting this nuclear war, basically. We need to invade before it's too late. They've got chemical weapons. And I mean, the UN was like, are you sure? And the US said, oh yes, we're really sure. We've got photos, we've got all this evidence. So they invaded Iraq in 2003. Saddam Hussein was captured, tried for war crimes, found guilty, and was executed. And the country was free. But they did not find any weapons of mass destruction. It just kind of seemed like a Bush family passion project to get Hussein out of control, which, okay, they did it. This left the country really unstable, however. The United States military was not entirely kind to a lot of Iraqis, in that many millions, honestly, of civilians lost their lives during this operation from 2003 to 2011. Many people wanted revenge for what was happening to their city, and Baghdad was bombed and destroyed, and many cities around were left in ruins. And there is also the Abu Ghraib Scandal, where in an Iraqi prison there were Iraqis being essentially tortured and humiliated by American soldiers, so people wanted revenge for that, obviously. And it was just quite a big mess, essentially. So eventually, like I said, the Americans pulled out fully by 2011. And 2011 was an interesting year in history, especially in this corner of the world. The Arab Spring occurred that year. It came to Iraq, but it wasn't really the kind of environment for a good Arab Spring protest like in other countries, including their neighbor of Syria, which had a big one that the government didn't like very much, and the Syrian civil war broke out. A lot of refugees came into Iraq. Iraq didn't really have the resources to deal with an influx of refugees during this transitional period. They'd had elections and a new constitution and things like that, but they were still, pretty not stable enough to handle humanitarian crisis next door. And then eventually a terrorist group known as ISIL sprung up, and in 2014 they captured Mosul and a lot of the areas up here. They the Islamic State, they wanted to wipe out anything that wasn't extreme Islam. And Anyway, many Kurdish people, many Yadizi people, Christians, lost their lives. They destroyed a lot of ancient artifacts, and it was pretty horrible. That's what I forgot to mention down here with the marshes. I totally forgot. One of the many crimes of Saddam Hussein was that he wanted to weed out traitors hiding in the marshes. I mean, he committed a lot of horrific crimes against his own people. I mean, there were so many mass graves found of civilians after he was taken from power, but he knew that there were like spies and guerrillas hiding in the marshes with the marsh people, so he diverted the rivers so the marshes would drain, and they pretty much completely drained, and the people there had to leave. And since he's been taken out of power, the country's been trying to rebuild the marshes, get the water back in there. And the marshes are pretty good. They're not how they were before, and a lot of the people haven't come back. They established lives elsewhere, you know. But anyway, that was the marshes. I forgot to mention that before. Anyway, back to 2014. The Iraqi government, the Kurd government, because the Kurds have their own government up here. I'm going to mention that in a second. And then, of course, their allies around the world fought back against the terrorists, and Mosul was freed by 2017. 2017, also, the Kurdish people got to hold a referendum about establishing their own independent country, which passed at 97%, and the government said, oh, that's illegal, we're going to ignore that, which made a lot of Kurdish people very angry. They're still, fighting politically, not fighting physically, for their right, for their own country, In 2019, a lot of protests sprung up against the government. 2018 is kind of when it started to boil over, but 2019 was when there were full-on marches and huge massive protests, and the prime minister resigned in 2020, partly due to all that unrest. And people are just fed up with how this government just doesn't want to rebuild to the point where people can have more comfortable lives. They're more focused on oil and various other things, but they did stop the terrorist incursion, I suppose, but there's still a lot more they could do. So that's pretty much where Iraq is today. It's in a very transitional period, I suppose, very uncertain period, and we'll just have to see where it goes. I'm going to show you some pictures in the book, though, because this country is fantastic. Look at this. This is a really ancient minaret. Can you believe that? Isn't that spectacular? That's so neat. There's so many neat things in Iraq in terms of its history. It makes me really want to go to the Iraq Museum and see some of the things there. Here's some of the marshes, right? Trying to rebuild it. Oh, look at this guy. He looks really interesting. Let's see what we've got. Oh boy, see, look at this. This is from Sumer. Isn't that incredible? Amazing. Oh, big old bowl. Alright, we've got a political map of Iraq, and you can really see the population here. Everyone lives over here. Nobody really lives over here. This is all desert. Look at this. Beautiful painting. Baghdad. See the blue dome up there. Children playing in war rubble. It's pretty sad, but it's a reality when you're a little kid in a place like that. Enjoying the nice day outside. Says there are students in Orbil. Euphrates River. It says a little oasis right here. The desert out there. A physical map. So you can see the big desert. Mesopotamia. All the rivers over here. These Algros Mountains. Oh my gosh, look at this picture. They're jumping into the Tigris River. My goodness, what an amazing dive that is. We've got a cargo ship out near Basra, it says. And here's some of the marshes. So here's the little huts out there, guy on his reed boat, and some cattle as well. So here's what I'm talking about, that they do get snow up in the mountains, like a little town. Playing in the snow. It does snow in Iraq, believe it or not. Let's see say down here is Basra, and this is Arbil. Very, like I said, very diverse country. And up here, does it talk about this up here? Yeah, the Citadel of Arbil. Very ancient building still there. Ooh, look at a wildcat, a desert cat. And here's a lion from the Baghdad Zoo. It's a really sad story in 2003 about the animals were abandoned in the zoo during the occupation. It's a really sad story. A beautiful heron. And the national bird of Iraq, it's the Chukar Partridge. These guys have fished some fish. This guy's growing some sunflowers. Awesome. And date palms, a plant that's been growing there since forever. I'm going to have some books later about Mesopotamia, and it talks about how they farmed the date palms. It's really interesting. This guy is helping to rebuild the marshes. His name's Azam Al-Wash, environmentalist. And look at this, it's bears. Another thing you don't really think about with Iraq, snow and bears, but here they are in the, let's see, the Ghraib Scandal National Park. Oh, here's Sargon. At least they believe it's Sargon, but very recognizable guy. Let's see, here's the Ziggurat of Ur. So the Ziggurat was a religious building where they would build like a platform, stairs, platform, stairs, platform. At the top was where like the gods lived, the priests worked. The building is still there, not entirely, but enough that you can go visit it. Mesopotamian Civilization. So Sumer is in green, that's 3000 BCE. The Acadian Empire is in the orange. You can see just how far it took over this region. The Babylonian Empire is this one right here. You can see Babylon right there. The Assyrians are in the purple, so here's the Assyrian Empire. And the Chaldeans was this region right here. And then the white outline is Iraq today. You can really see just how far these empires stretched. It's a picture from the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, at least from what we can imagine it was like. There's King Nebuchadnezzar. The spread of Islam. So like I said, it started down here in Mecca and Medina. You can see the borders of Iraq right there, and you can see how quickly it spread just from between 632 to 750, how far it reached all across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Here is Al-Kindi, one of the great philosophers from the Golden Age. Oil being drilled. This is Abd al-Karim Qasim. He led the first coup against the kingdom. And there's Saddam Hussein. And here's Saddam Hussein in his war crimes trial. And some soldiers here inspecting a bombed out building. You see all the bombed out cars there too. A terrorist and people fleeing from the terrorist activities. It must be terrifying. She's casting her vote, looks like. Yep. And here's the Kurdistan Parliament. So like I said, the Kurdistan has their own place. They just don't have borders for their own place, right? There's that beautiful blue dome in Baghdad and a map of it down here. Like I said, they've the zoo and lots of really fascinating places around. There's the Tigris River cutting it right in half. This has Al-Kar and Al-Rusafa. She's casting her vote. And this was the Kurdish president at the time this book came out, which was only a couple of years ago. They're casting their votes in Parliament, the Council of Representatives. The flag, let's check it out. The flag has changed a lot. The book I'm going to read to you tomorrow is from like 15 years ago, and they don't even have this flag. They have an older flag. Let's see what this says. Iraq's national flag has been redesigned many times over the years. And the like I said, in 1959, shortly after the military coup overthrew the monarchy of Faisal II, Iraq adopted a new flag. It consisted of 3 vertical stripes, black, white, and green. A red 8-pointed star with a yellow circle at its center appeared on the white stripe. The yellow circle represented the Kurdish minority. When the Ba'ath Party came to power in 1963, the flag was changed to have 3 horizontal stripes of red, white, and black, the traditional colors of Arab people. 3 5-pointed green stars were on the white stripe. In 1991, the phrase "God is great," written in Arabic, was added in green to the white stripe. After Saddam Hussein was driven from power in 2003, the Iraqi Governing Council designed a new national flag. The top part of the flag featured a light blue crescent on a horizontal white background. The bottom of the flag was 3 horizontal stripes of blue, yellow, and blue. Most Iraqis who did not want to abandon the traditional Arab colors rejected the flag. In 2008, the Iraqi government adopted yet another flag, stripes of red, white, and black, with the white band containing "God is great" written in Kufic script, the oldest form of all Arabic scripts. Very interesting story of their flag. It says he's a judge, working hard. This was the prime minister at the time this book came out. It's Haider al-Abadi, and he stepped down in 2018. He's taking the oath of office here as a provincial council member. And very fancy looking soldiers on parade. So this guy is building a new water treatment plant, it says. That's great. And here's their money. They use the dinar. And they are drilling for some oil right here, aren't they? Let's see. This guy's got his water buffaloes in the water. Tomatoes. Resources map. So you can see there are lots of cattle out here in the desert and lots of things growing out here in the valleys, but oil's where the money's at. Do you like tomatoes? I'm not a big fan. I don't like raw tomatoes. I need them chopped up in a stew or something. I don't like the texture is what it is. Don't mind the taste, but I don't like the texture. Big busy streets. This is in Suleimania. And they've got date palms heading out for export. Some wonderful faces here. They are Kurdish women, it says, in Erbil. Population map. Again, everyone just lives over here. And this is a Bedouin woman. Looks like she's making some bread. Here are some Kurdish children. What are they doing? Taking part in a celebration. Alright. I wish it talked more about what they're doing. Looks like some kind of religious parade. Speaking of, here is an Assyrian woman praying at this icon up here. Ethnic groups. So, Iraq is home to Shia and Sunni Arabs, which is kind of unusual for an Arab country. It's usually like, if they have both, like one of them is like 5% or 2%. It's pretty even. And you can see all the different ethnic groups here. They've got a sign for some tailoring. It's the Kurdish language. This is a Syrian refugee camp. Going to school. Oh, beautiful, beautiful mosque. Iraq has some absolutely gorgeous mosques and some very important ones in Islam. I'll show you some pictures later. It's praying. Big, beautiful dome. So intricate. And they're breaking fast for Ramadan, so they're all getting to eat. And these books always talk about Mecca, so there's a picture of Mecca. And a very beautiful Quran. So this is the shrine of Al-Hussein ibn Ali in Karbala. Hussein's the grandson of Muhammad, the third Shiite leader. Very important important place, but not as important as this one. So this is the Mosque of Ali, where, does it talk? Sorry, the tomb of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, the son-in-law and cousin of Muhammad. He basically started Shia Islam and led it, and this is like second to Mecca in Shia Islam. It's a very important site. And it's time for prayer. They got their shoes lined up there, of course. The Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani. This is an Easter service, it says, in Mosul. Looks like he's, I don't know. I don't know what they're doing, but it's an Easter celebration. And these are Yazidi people. So they are an ethnic group that do their own thing. They have their own religion. It's very secretive. It's a very closed religion. It has lots of different elements of other religions in it. But they're celebrating their new year in April. Another beautiful mosque. It's so amazing. I love all the tile work in these beautiful mosques. Here's a good painting. The Tigris River, the Blue Dome again, so you know where you are, Baghdad. This is Dia Azawi, famous modern artist. This is a big monument in Baghdad. It's the Liberty Monument. And some artifacts saved in the museum after all the turmoil that's happened. It's so important that we protect this because it's not just Iraq history, it's world history. This is where all of it began. There's Sinbad. I'll talk about that in a second. Here is some of the Epic of Gilgamesh written in cuneiform. Isn't that incredible? So they would stamp the letters into the clay and then bake it to preserve it, since they didn't use paper. And yeah, one of the first story written down. So another famous one would be 1001 Arabian Nights, and one of the stories is about Sinbad the Sailor. Aladdin's the other really famous one out of that. Famous author, his name's Ahmed Sadawi. This is an oud, traditional instrument. Let's see. Qadim al-Sahir, famous musician. These kids are playing some soccer. He's doing a slide tackle there to get the ball. Looks like you missed, but nice job. A very big sport. This is Amo Baba, very famous soccer player, or football player from Iraq. And they're playing some basketball too. Another big sport. There's some really wonderful faces there. Great smiles. Oh, here's a very stern face, very strong face. And here's a family having dinner all together. Here's a wedding. Really wonderful, very joyous. Here's a doctor hard at work. And they're working hard at school. She's not, but everyone else is. And some more students working very hard together. He's not, but they are. And these guys worked very hard in school because they graduated. Congratulations. Oh man, doesn't that look good? Rocky Tashreeb. That looks delicious. And here's a pastry chef making lots and lots of delicious pastries. They've got some shawarma. Yum yum. This food's so good. Some more wonderful faces together. Little family. Celebrating. Playing the music. And this is on Eid al-Adha, which is like a celebration of those we've lost. So they've got all of their memorials out there for their loved ones. And it's Nowruz basically, but the new year in April, the traditional new year. And having fun at the theme park in Baghdad. And that's the end of our book. So thank you so much for watching. I'll have a couple more videos. I'll have a whisper video for you tomorrow, and then some other videos about Mesopotamia, because I find that history so fascinating. So thank you again. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on those videos. I hope you found this video relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a very good night.